a fighter who is very popular on the scene these days. He goes by the names of the James Krause, right? And you would hear, because if we're looking at the fights, right, prelim fights are going on, not the most eventful, but there's some fun fights. You have a Miles Johns, and Miles Johns is set to fight a Vince Morales. This was a grudge match. This was actually, some people are hailing it as one of the worst matches of 2022, right there with the Carla Esparza versus Rose Namajunas #2. Given that there was a lot of heat, these dudes wanted to fight each other before the fight started, and then when it was actually time to fight, it was like, where did all that energy go? Y'all ain't even throwing, bro. What's happening? The whole entire point is Miles Johns, he gets the dub. He gets the decision win. He just moved to Glory MMA. And then he announces after the fight, hey, yo, like, you know, it feels good to get a win. This was I took this fight on 2 weeks' notice, and they pulled my coach at the last hour, right? They told him that he couldn't corner me and that he's suspended, right? So everyone's like, you know, he didn't really name a name, but what exactly are we talking about? But he was talking about James Krause, right? And given that I've done a little bit of research on the topic since then, I guess there was no formal suspension given. He was not formally suspended by the UFC. But basically they wanted to say, hey, let's not have you corner a fighter while you're under investigation for a very sketchy incident that we talked about recently, man. You remember when we were talking about Shayilan Nurdenbecka versus Derek Minner, right? Derek Minner blows his knee out like in the first kick that he throws in the fight. Nurdenbecke gets the big dub. But the big story was the actual betting line shifted from Minner being a massive favorite, more or less, to being a underdog in the span of an hour. One of the biggest betting line shifts that we've seen in quite some time. So James Krause under suspicion there, saying, and here's the context, AJ, because I don't want to get lost in translation. I'm not making an allegation here, but here's the context. The context is people are saying, James Krause, are you betting on your fighters? Well, people have been betting on themselves and their fighters for the entire history of the UFC, as long as it's been allowed, like in terms of betting, right? But the question is, are you betting against your fighters because you have inside information? A lot of people, AJ, they're looking at that as very schemy and scumbag behavior. I want your opinion. Is that scumbag behavior to bet against your fighter that you know your fighter is injured and he's not going to be able to perform, but he chooses to perform anyways? Is that scumbag behavior or is that just smart?
If you don't disclose that the injury, or if you're saying like this guy, you're telling everybody else that this is a 10-1, your guy's gonna go out there and starch him, without a doubt, you're putting the hype on, and then you go and do a shady bet where you bet the opposite and your guy goes out there and throws the fight. I think that's where the scumbaggery comes in. But if you're going out there, like if I'm a coach and I want to bet on some fights and I know if my fighter's going to do the best they can, they're going to go out there, they're going to try their hardest, but the guy they're fighting is, or the girl they're fighting, whoever it is, let's say they're fighting Valentina Shevchenko. I'm not putting money down on my fighter. I'm sorry. I mean, we're not going to take the fight, or I'm going to make some money on Shev, and that's how it goes. But I don't think that's the scumbaggery. What I think it is the non-disclosing of the injury or the promotion or whatever the case is, and then going behind and not, and making the opposite bet. That's where I think it comes in. And I think that's where the investigation is coming into play, because it does sound weird betting against your own team. It never paints the right connotation. What do you think, Derek? Is this some tomfoolery going on or what?
Bro, I've been struggling because it's very clear and open. It's like brazenly open. James Krause hosts the 1% Club, right? His betting podcast. It's literally wagering, right? Talking about MMA fights and all that stuff. And he's like, yeah, dude. Oh, I know this guy and I've seen this guy and I've rolled with this guy before. So like I have a little bit of that. And it's like the luxury of, yeah, I'm in that scene. So I have the information. Should you be able to bet on that? Absolutely. I think personally. But he does have a Discord. This is the big thing. He has a Discord, right? And he charges a lot of money for people to be in this Discord so he can give them their plays and he can literally tail their plays, right? So for me, it's just like, this is the cost of doing business right here, man. You making money right here. You putting up bets and shit. I'm sure all your fighters are also aware. And I'm sure that Krause, and this is my prediction, this is completely me. I have no evidence to back this, but I'm sure he would give some of the fighters he's close to, hey, man, if you a betting man, here's the play. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should bet on this person or you should bet on that person, whatever the case may be. Now, I just don't see the difference between being a coach and betting on your fighter and being a fighter and betting on yourself. Right? I don't see the difference. I think it's the same exact thing right here. If you're confident, like for an example, what if he bet on Derek Minner that fight? Or what if he just stayed away and didn't bet on anybody? Some people were saying that was part of the issue. They're like, well, he normally has a habit of betting on his fighters, but he didn't bet on his fighter this one. So that's sketchy behavior. Is sketchy not placing a wager? Like, that's ridiculous, right?
That's absolutely ridiculous. And we say all the time, there's stay away fights. Sometimes you see it, it's not worth it. It's a stay away fight. Nothing wrong with not putting the bet. That right there is interesting. But if, especially like you said, the insider information, I think that's the only reason it's an investigation and not an actual suspension, because there's a lot of stuff to look at.
Hmm.
But I don't think this is any kind of foul play, especially with how prominent and how open James Krause is with this. This
Yeah.
dude has a YouTube show about it. He's a podcast. He's got a lot of things
Yeah.
out there that really would be very jeopardized if he was to go out there and be doing some shady shit. So I don't.
Absolutely.
I think it's all good. Go.
And just to be clear, I'm going to read this. This is from the ESPN article in regards to this whole entire situation. This is to show, like, we're not throwing any allegations out there, man. There's actually no real, like, evidence of wrongdoing, like AJ just said. But the last paragraph of this article says, the wagering activity around the Derek Minner and Shailan Nerdenbeck bout from November 5th remains under review by our betting integrity partner, Don Best Sports. The UFC said in a statement to ESPN on Saturday, at this time, we have no information that either the athletes involved in the bout or anyone associated with their teams was involved in any wrongdoing. And then Mullen noted on Saturday he couldn't comment on why Krause was not in Miles John's, corner for the fight with Morales. So at this point, there's just a lot of speculation and a lot of this up in the air. But the whole entire caveat to cap this whole entire thing off and move on. Do you think the UFC is making the correct move by prohibiting coaches, trainers, fighters from betting on fights or betting on themselves in fights? Do you think that this is the wrong move, given fighter pay has been a big issue for a very, very long time? And who does everybody shout out after their fight? Skinny bets, right? They shout out, steak, or they shout out whatever their partner is so they can make some extra money on the side. Do you think that this is the wrong move?
No, I think it is the wrong move, Derek. It's there's so many, like, it's such a gray area. I'm excuse me. We've seen betting, let's say, just in baseball and how all that kind of goes down, and just in any sport. A lot of these other big professional sports don't allow you to bet on your team, just to kind of avoid the gray area. But with MMA, why wouldn't you bet on yourself? You're not playing with the team. You versus another man are fighting. I would always bet on myself in that instance if I'm getting locked in a cage. Why wouldn't anybody else? I see this in a little different, man. I think this is a bad call. It's a bad look. It's showing that you don't trust the people that you are employing and contracting, man. And with the fighter pay, there's a lot to go on, man. I think this is a very bad call. I'm sure you're in the same boat with me, but do you have any other takeaways from it?
Well, yeah, you could imagine Floyd Mayweather, for an example. It's boxing. It's different, right? But Floyd Mayweather bet on himself for a vast majority of his fights, right? So I think that as a fighter, you should be able to bet on yourself. Now, does there come the risk of, I'm going to bet on the other fighter that I'm fighting and I'm going to throw the fight? Yeah, there's always a risk for all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's very easy to catch somebody doing that. And you obviously, as a fighter, you're going to bet on the guy you're fighting. That's already a terrible look right there, right? So, I feel you. I do think that they should still be able to bet on themselves personally until there's like an actual unionization or whatever the case may be, which will most likely never happen with the fighters. But so be it, man. That was just the big story I wanted to talk about. Miles John still got the dub, right? But James Krause was the basically highlight of the story.